Good evening, everyone. I'm not on the screen, but hi, this is Matthew Higgs, and welcome to this evening's broadcast via Zoom, a celebration of the life and work of Anne Chu. This evening's conversation will include contributions from 10 fans, friends, and colleagues. And we're really grateful that they could all join us tonight. We anticipate the event will last around 75 minutes, an hour and a quarter, and each person will speak for roughly 5 to 8 minutes. This evening's conversations are taking place on the occasion of an exhibition of white columns, and you can see an image on your screen, an installation shot. And it's an exhibition of works made by Anne Chu between 2012 and 2016. Anne died in 2016, and this is the first exhibition of her work in New York City since 2014, when she had an exhibition at Tracy Williams Limited. In 2017 in San Francisco, there was a posthumous exhibition held at Anglin Gilbert Gallery. And a number of the works that were shown in San Francisco are included in the White Columns exhibition, alongside works that were in Anne's studio when she passed, and they're being seen for the first time. But for many people, it's the first opportunity to see Anne's work in a good number of years. And if we can see other additional images from the installation, Brittany, that would be great. I'm only seeing one on my screen right now. So we're just going to show you some installation shots from the current exhibition at White Columns, which runs through December 18, just to give you a sense of the exhibition. The exhibition comprises of a group of sculptural works alongside some of Anne's works on paper. And you're getting, I think, a good sense of that from the images you can see on screen now. The works that you can see now, for example, were included in the San Francisco exhibition. And the tableau of the three-part sculpture you can see in the background was in Anne's studio in 2006 when she passed. And we're just going to go through a few more of the installation shots, and then we're going to begin tonight's event. This is the work that was in Anne's studio, and it's being shown for the first time publicly. This is the detail. This is cast aluminum. And a ceramic sculpture art with a burlap. And a rat is a recurring motif throughout the exhibition and also through these late works by Anne. And yes, if you're going to be in New York City, we encourage you to stop by the gallery. The exhibition is on view through December 18, and we will be closed for Thanksgiving. So just a heads up about that. So we're going to start tonight's proceedings. I'm going to introduce each speaker. And as I mentioned before, each speaker will speak for roughly 5 to 8 minutes. And I've asked each of the speakers to introduce themselves and also to tell us where they currently are so we can get a sense of their situation too. And so I'm now going to introduce the first speaker. We can stop the installation images. Brittany, that would be great. The first speaker is going to be Janice Guy. And Janice, welcome, and feel free to introduce yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Hi, my name's Janice Guy, and I'm talking to you from New York City. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Matthew, and everyone at White Columns for organizing this exhibition and this event that gives Anne's friends, family, and colleagues an opportunity to come together. And a particular thanks to Beatrix Chu, Anne's niece, for her indispensable and meticulous work with Anne's estate and her collaboration on this show. Anne was my buddy. We were friends for some 20 years. We first met when she had her studio in Renwick Street here in New York, which became the location of the Gallery AC Project Room, at the time run by Paul Bloodgood, Alyssa Friedman, and Anne. I was organizing at the time exhibitions in my apartment nearby on King Street, And we all worked together on an exhibition with Katie Schimmert, who also had his studio on Renwick Street. And together, AC Project Room and I went on to produce Katie's Super 8 film, The Astronaut. But Anne and I really became close 2 years later when she was there for me very spontaneously after the death of my mother. Over the years, I'd see her always step in to give comfort and support to any of her friends and family who were ill or grieving or just in need emotionally, practically, and financially. And never more than in her support and care she dedicated to Paul Bloodgood, who was her mentor and she was his muse. As Paul's degenerative disease advanced, Anne was there to help Paul's wife, Kelly, and their children, Castle and Abel, cooking for them, driving the kids to soccer and dance classes, drawing and sewing with them. And well into her illness, she was still driving Paul to his studio next to hers, making sure that he could continue to paint. She made 2 beautiful ceramic sculptures of Castle and Abel that were part of her extraordinary 2013 exhibition, Anima Vagula Blandula, at the Mies van der Rohe designed House Lange in Krefeld. But I'm getting ahead. Back in 1998, AC Project Room and my new gallery partnership, Murray Guy, opened next to each other in a building in Chelsea. Now we were neighbors, and at that time, we started to travel together too. Over the years, Anne and I went to many places together, to India, as well as Berlin, Madrid, Naples, Pompeii, all places that gave her inspiration and material for her work. In fact, it was in Madrid, in the Real Academia di San Fernando, that we came across Goya's small painting, The Burial of the Sardine, the reference for the sequence of watercolors in this exhibition. Anne had great powers of persuasion. She talked me into doing things I thought I would never have the nerve to do, like paragliding and scuba diving. In fact, we got our scuba diving certification together on the Grenadines on one of our Caribbean vacations. On our last diving vacation together in Bonaire, Anne took underwater photographs that became sketches for many of the works in this show, including the rat, whose lifeless body Anne found on the ocean floor, lying incongruously amidst the fabulous coral and exotic fish, most likely tossed overboard from a passing yacht. Scuba diving was exciting. My adrenaline came from my constant terror. Anne, on the other hand, was absolutely fearless. In fact, her fearlessness was apparent in everything that she took on in her life and in her art. She was fearless at a depth of 20 plus meters, just as she was fearless in her use of subject matter and materials, and fearless in the handling of the heavy power tools that she used. And once Anne persuaded me to accompany her to Maine, where she was to pick up an Egyptian Mal kitten that she was adopting, and who she typically named Mouse, and who she loved very much. On that trip, she persuaded me to adopt a kitten too. And the two are now always together. After Anne's death, Mouse came to live with me. They even want to be part of this Zoom. I had to bring one over here. Normally when I do a Zoom, they're walking around behind me, but they're here with me, constantly reminding me of my beautiful, brilliant friend, who we all miss very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. That was great. The next speaker is Connie Butler. And Connie, welcome. And please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Matthew, and Janice and Beatrix. It's wonderful to be with all of you. I'm Connie Butler. I'm the chief curator at the Hammer Museum, although at the moment I'm at the MCA Chicago, which is actually a place where I saw a number of Anne's wonderful exhibitions here at Donald Young Gallery. And I haven't written anything. I wish that I had. I, in many ways, feel like there's so much to say and to write and to think about Anne's work still that I feel a bit daunted by that task. So what I'm going to do just briefly right now is just be very anecdotal and personal. And my history with Anne began I'm embarrassed almost to say, in 1993, which is almost exactly 30 years ago, I think, if my math is right. And I was living in New York at the time and curator at the Neuberger Museum of Art in Purchase, New York, which I'm sure all of you know is a wonderful museum about an hour north of the city. And I'm sorry, I'm in a public space, so there's some noise. I apologize. And one of the things that though I lived in the city and commuted there, I felt compelled all the time to be looking, as we do in New York, going to far-flung sites to find whatever exhibition or artist that I was pursuing at the time. And I went on one occasion to a show that I believe Amy Hauft was in also. I went with Beverly Semmes. We went on a kind of field trip to the Snug Harbor Cultural Center, which I don't think still exists as it did then in terms of an exhibition making place. But there was a beautiful outdoor sculpture exhibition that may have been curated by Jane Farver. I couldn't find it actually online. And Anne's work had been recommended to me, and it was what she made was a kind of curtain of feathers that was strung up between two trees. And it was absolutely breathtaking and arresting, and as all of Anne's work is, I think tough and poetic at the same time, this incredible combination that you see in all the work that Matthew just showed, but also in the wonderful image that marked today's occasion of Anne and her goat that she was sculpting. That combination of sweetness and softness and incredible toughness and belligerence, I think, is something that all of Anne's best work had. But it was a great field trip that day. I can still picture that work. And I then went to visit her studio, which was then on Grand Street in Williamsburg, and invited her to be part of a little project series that I was trying to carve out at the Neuberger Museum in that very, very austere brick building in the museum's lobby space. And I was inviting artists like Polly Affelbaum and others to come and make something in the lobby space. And Anne came with the selection of works that we made from the studio that was, kind of mystifying and still a body of work that I really have no idea how to put into language, I think, which is also, I think, something very true about Anne's work, that there is something like willfully unarticulable, maybe inarticulate, but maybe not articulable, if that's a word, about it. And there was in the center of the space, there was a kind of endless column of ostrich eggs, a beautiful sculpture. There was a fantastic little wooden car that she had somehow hacked away with a chainsaw and other tools that had a beautiful roughness about it, and a number of other great works. And it was a beautiful grouping of works. I guess the other thing I want to say about her is that we began a dialogue over time, as I think she had with all of us here on the screen, that lasted all of the intervening years. She is part of a community of artists who I talk to regularly, weekly, if not monthly. We started to have monthly dinners with Beverly Semmes, Catherine Morris, and others. But she was, and I think remains, deeply part of my thinking as a curator. And it's, I didn't expect to get emotional, excuse me. There aren't many artists, I think, for each of us who fill that role. And I think that for me, the most interesting curatorial practice comes from that place of deep dialogue and connection with artists. And Anne was that for me. And I think much of it had to do with trying to figure out what on earth she was really doing, and that last work that you have at White Columns, which I look forward to seeing in a few weeks. It's so mystifying. It's so unfinished in a way. There's so much more work she had to make, and that it would have been wonderful to see. But so those are just some thoughts about Anne. It's nice to be with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. That's really great and really appreciate it. The next speaker is Emily Letourneau. I hope I'm pronouncing your surname correctly, Emily.
Yeah,
and
thanks.
Just if you would like to introduce yourself and tell us where you are.
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone. I'm Emily Letourneau. I'm joining tonight from Corbett versus Dempsey Gallery in Chicago, where I'm senior director here. I want to thank Janice and Beatrix and Matthew and Brittany for inviting me tonight to this event. I was so happy to hear about the show at White Columns, and really glad I got a chance to see the show with Janice a couple weeks ago when I was in New York. So tonight I prepared just a selection of some images of exhibitions that Anne had at Donald Young Gallery when I worked there as the director in the 2000s. So I'm just gonna share my screen. Okay, is everyone seeing the images now?
Yeah, it looks great, Emily.
Okay, thanks. I started working for Donald Young in December of 1999. He just moved back to Chicago after 8 years in Seattle, and in June of that year, it opened a beautiful space in the West Loop. I was new to Chicago, just out of grad school, when I came in for my interview. Anne's first exhibition with the gallery was on view. For a gallery known for showing minimalist sculpture and pioneering video art, Anne's work was unexpected. In the massive main gallery space were 7 carved wood sculptures, vaguely resembling mountain formations, expressively painted in vibrant colors. On the walls hung large landscape drawings, abstractly rendered, very much in conversation with the sculptures. The gallery was imposing, but the strength of the low-slung landscape forms commanded the space. Down the hall, in each of the 2 smaller galleries, stood 2 ceramic court lady figures, colorfully painted in an equally expressive style as the landscapes. Next to each court lady sat a small bronze house. The contrast of materials, one of incredible strength, the other of extreme fragility, was striking, as well as the discord of scale conveying distance and space. Anne began working with Donald not long before I started at the gallery. They met in the mid-90s through Josiah McElhaney, an artist Donald represented, who at the time was also showing at AC Project Room. Donald was drawn to Anne's intensity and strength of vision, both in her work and personality. They were both determined and uncompromising. These shared traits both frustrated and endeared them to one another. Donald had great appreciation and eye for sculpture. He was intrigued by artists who were concerned with space and how their work inhabited 3 dimensions. Anne's relationship to rendering dimensionality, both on paper and in sculpture, was unique. With each exhibition and body of work, it was always thrilling to see how figure, space, and materials were pushed in ways only Anne could imagine. Anne's second exhibition, Understudies, opened at the gallery in November of 2002 and featured 3 marionette sculptures. 2 were human figures made of carved wood, wire, and armature, dressed in clothing fabricated by Anne. The 3rd marionette was a landscape comprised of wire, covered in fabric embroidered with Anne's images of watercolor drawings. All 3 marionettes hung from the gallery's bow trusses, the figure's feet barely touching the ground. Also in this space is a life-size bear sculpture roughly carved in wood by chainsaw, standing solidly on the ground. On the walls hung a series of 10 watercolor drawings of landscapes and marionette figure studies. In 2007, Anne's ambitious exhibition entitled Sculpture in Monotypes featured large-scale ceramic mountain and rock sculptures. The sinuous shapes of the rocks and mountains, like line drawings in 3 dimensions, seemed to defy gravity and were a marvel of ceramic engineering. The centerpiece of the exhibition was mountains with hanging rocks, comprised of stacked ceramic forms held in place by the gravity of their own weight. Once again, employing the gallery's bow trusses, 3 ceramic rocks hung above the mountains, creating a landscape vignette. A single embroidered cardinal joined the rocks and mountains in the gallery, laboriously crafted through a digital embroidery system, perched high on a metal stand. In 2009, Anne presented the inaugural exhibition in the gallery's final location in the historic Santa Fe building on Michigan Avenue. In the more intimate jewel box space, Anne presented figures and animals cast in bronze, aluminum, and ceramic, together with small-scale, densely rendered egg tempera and oil paintings. The cast sculptures bore the expressiveness of the original construction from carved wood, foam, and paper. The bronze El Primo, inspired by Velázquez's painting, stood in the beautiful marble mezzanine just outside the gallery. Although I worked with Anne for many years, our friendship really developed after the onset of Donald's illness in 2011. It was at this time that I saw a new side of Anne. I learned the passion and intensity she brought to her work, she brought to her friendships as well. The way she reached out to me and cared for me in our intense time of loss was incredibly meaningful. As we spent more time together, I began to realize how big her heart was, and the care she gave me was given to so many in her life. I'm forever grateful for the opportunity to have worked with Anne, and even more grateful to have had her as a friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. And amazing to see all those images, just so much extraordinary work just shown in one city in the context of one gallery. Thank you so much. The next speaker is Suzanne Weaver. And Susan, welcome. And if you'd like to introduce yourself and let us know where you currently are.
Thank you, Matthew. I'm Suzanne Weaver, and I'm speaking to you from Camden, Maine, where I have just recently stepped out or retired from museum life after 30 years and living and working in Maine as an independent curator and writer. So I'm very happy to be here with you. It's an incredible honor to be able to speak about Anne. And I'm very humbled to be with such and among such a stellar group of curators and colleagues and artists. I want to express my deep appreciation to Janice, Matthew, and the estate of Anne Chu for organizing what looks like a beautiful, insightful, and very poetic installation. I can't wait to see it next month. I don't know what the happiest day of my life has been, or if there is happiness, which is a topic for another place and time, and probably for my next therapy session. But I do know without a doubt, a long weekend in 1996 transformed my personal as well as my professional life and changed my perspective on the possibilities of art. In 1996, on a trip to New York as a new curator at the Dallas Museum of Art, I saw Anne's uncanny cast paper bear in John Weber's 25th anniversary show, 25 Younger Artists. Even when I learned that it was inspired by the ancient terracotta warriors in China, my mind could not stop. It could not keep shifting, questioning what I was seeing and what I was feeling. It was utterly present at once and alien and mysterious. It was then and it is now. So then I ran over to AC Project Room on Renwick, where I met Anne and Paul for the first time and saw more of Anne's work. The next stop was Janice Guy, where she had organized in her King Street townhouse an installation which included a couple of Anne's breathtakingly gorgeous watercolors. It's hard for me to believe that in one day, Anne, Paul, and Janice, what a fortunate trifecta. What I learned from each of them about art, what it takes to be an artist, and how important it is to support, advocate for, and facilitate the work of other artists is immeasurable. Many artists that AC Project presented or that Anne or Paul introduced me to were included in my project series at the Dallas Museum of Art and were acquired by the DMA as well as other museums that I worked for. I attribute the development of my artist-driven philosophy, curatorial philosophy and practice to them. I went on to show Anne's work, bears, tomb figures, and watercolors at the DMA in 1998 and acquired a court lady, its form based on the spirit object that was placed in the tombs in China for the comfort and use of the deceased. I acquired one for the museum and also placed in a private collection in Dallas. It was during the organization of Anne Show, I was fortunate to meet and work with Donald Young, a great human being and galleryist who made a real difference in my life too. I will never forget what a great party we had after the opening at the Carousel Club, a recreation of Jack Ruby's Dallas nightclub. Oh my God, Donald Young and Liz Lorner were an amazing couple on the dance floor. Recently, I looked at the Court Lady on the DMA's website. It is still fresh. It still holds up. It's singular in its inventiveness and exploration of the relationship between form, material, and content. Many things have been eloquently said and written about Anne's expansive range of sources, materials, techniques, and processes, and how her work exists in between realm, a hybrid or synthesis of many opposites, ancient and contemporary, past and present, east and west, painting and sculpture, abstraction and figurative, assembling and de-assembling. For me, Anne was full of contradictions. She could be loving, generous, and affectionate at once, and then read me the riot act on an artist I gave a show for or acquired. She was a tough love, mentor, and friend, prickly and complicated. As Connie mentioned in her brilliant essay for Anne's show at the museum in Crayfield when describing a bear, Anne was the bear. I have a vivid image of Anne from that same transformative weekend. After a few drinks together in a bar nearby, Anne got on her bike and rode out into the night. She didn't have a helmet. And I remember saying to myself, damn, I don't think I've ever met a more fearless and courageous human being ever. To paraphrase Patti Smith's distilled quote regarding her friend Robert Mapplethorpe in her book, Just Kids, I learned from Anne that often contradictions is the clearest way to the truth. I love and miss you, Anne, always. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. That was wonderful. And I would like to introduce our next speaker, which is Bruce Pearson. Bruce, welcome. And if you'd like to introduce yourself and just let us know where you currently are. Bruce, can you hear us? I can't hear Bruce. Bruce?
Hello?
Can we all hear Bruce now?
Hello,
Okay,
hello?
sorry, Bruce. Yeah, please proceed.
Okay, sorry. My name is Bruce Pearson, and I'm over in Long Island City in New York City at the moment, and not too far from where Anne's studio and Anne and Paul's studio used to be. I'm still terribly, terribly shocked that Anne is no longer with us. And she went in she started to get sick and seemed to have never come out of the hospital. But that being said, when I went to the show at White Columns, and all the work just came right back to life. It was amazing. And I just want to speak about this one experience that I had looking at one of the cluster of sculptures in the show. I was viewing the show and I was reminded of a story she told me. A good friend of hers had come and was looking at her work and wasn't sure about the installation. The friend didn't think that it was resolved. Anne then suggested that she take another look. With Anne's work, it always warrants another look. There are so many surprises. As I was looking at the cluster of sculptures, I was reminded of that story. I entered the main room and I came across the winged figure covered in burlap. Next to it was a figure on a form on the floor of a strange gray object, and behind a soft rectangle with a rat lying in one of the openings. As I moved around the gray object, it revealed itself to be a head with its tongue sticking out. And in the back of the rectangle hangs a small bag whose content lies hidden from all. As I kept looking at it, I kept thinking of her suggestion that one should take another look. The work kept on opening up for me, and it kept its amazing secrets at the same time. I'm so thankful for her leaving all this work and for me, helping me develop a deeper way of seeing. That's that.
Thank you, Bruce. And I'm going to now introduce our next speaker, which is Aki Fujiyoshi. And Aki, if you'd just like to introduce yourself and let everyone know where you currently are.
Yes, hi, I'm Aki Fujiyoshi. I'm actually in Rhode Island at the moment, but I normally am living in New York, downtown, not so far away from my columns, actually. I was a close friend of Anne's and a artist with AC from about 1995 until they closed in 2001. I met Anne actually through Paul Bloodgood, and I met him probably, I hate to even say it's like in the late 80s or something. And at some point, I think probably around 1991 or so, he invited me to see a show at Art Cart, which was sort of the beginning of my relationship with AC Project Room. Shortly after, it was so crowded there, I mean, that I felt I had to go back later on to see the work properly. And that's when I met Alyssa Friedman, who, along with Anne and Paul, started AC Project Room. Anne I met probably in 93, 94. This is when AC Project Room was on Broome Street, and she had a small piece hanging that had a bird in it. And Paul pointed to it and said, "You really should get to know her. She's really great." And I was like, okay, and at some point when I was hanging out there, she came in, she was busy. So she just gave me the most perfunctory hello and then left. And I was like, that's the person you wanted me to meet and get to know? Because it seemed like she was not at all interested, but she proved to be one of the warmest people I have ever met, and quickly became a very good friend. I would say that probably it was when they moved back to Renwick or moved to Renwick, that my friendship with her deepened, partly because I had a show there, and then we, did different projects together. We also ended up going to St. Bart's together and running around doing different things. So there was many aspects of Anne that have been mentioned already, both her more prickly nature and her warm and generous side. The thing about Anne that I always appreciated was she was always herself. I mean, if she was in a bad mood, she was in a bad mood. If she was in a good one, she was exuberant and just wonderfully affectionate and warm. One of the things that kind of really shows how loyal she is that after I withdrew from the art world more actively, she didn't, she always made time for me even when she was very busy. And actually, I ended up helping her with some of her pieces in the studio and some of the things that required Photoshop work or Illustrator work. Actually, some of the pieces in the show now brought back some bittersweet or poignant memories of us trying to get some of those laser cut designs to work properly. But she always was so good to her friends. And so she felt so deeply, and she was so consistent in her support and in her sharing of information and knowledge. So I don't know, it's it's wonderful that her work is up again, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak at this, discussion of her life and her work and hear all these wonderful things. Although I think she wasn't always very articulate about her work, I think she sometimes struggled with that a little bit. It wasn't for lack of having something to say or feeling very deeply about things. And, she was super smart. So I think that being an artist, particularly with the different mediums she used and her different ways of expressing things, was perfect for her depth of personality, her intelligence, and her wit and sort of whimsicalness. I think one of the things that I began to appreciate in her art as I got to know her more was the sense of humor and the sense of wonder and absurdity that was a part of the pieces. So again, I'm very happy to see her work again and be reminded of all the different parts of her again.
Thank you, Aki. It's really appreciated. And I'm now going to welcome our next speaker, is Ellen Lesperance. And Ellen, welcome. If you could introduce yourself and let everyone know where you currently are.
Hi, I'm Ellen Lesperance, and I'm an artist, and I was Anne's assistant in the aughts. And I really hope I can keep it together. I mean, it's been a hard time. Okay, I'm really sorry if I have a hard time.
Oh, take your time, Ellen.
Okay. In 2002, I moved to New York City for the second time. I was dating a friend of Anne's studio assistant, Con Vo. Con was leaving the job and thought my boyfriend at the time should take it since he had an MFA from Columbia and he was a sculptor. And Anne met him and wanted nothing to do with him. So I asked Con if I could apply. On my first day working for Anne, she was getting a piece finished to send to Art Basel and asked me to shape and cut cardboard lapels for the cloak of a large sculpture. I guess I was okay. I was inoffensive enough that she hired me. I had a background in knitting and clothing patterning, and she liked that. It was confidence building to be relied upon for sculptural skills that I thought at the time as being of lesser importance than, say, woodworking or mold making. A lot of the more traditional sculpture things that she wanted help with, I didn't know how to do, but she taught me. And either I could do it or I couldn't. And then she let me do it or she didn't. She could always do things herself. She tried to teach me chainsaw carving. In the first studio I worked with her in, the one that she shared with Paul on West 25th Street, she had a little walk-in closet-sized wood shop in a built-out room behind her desk. And she would put all of her bright orange protective gear on, her pants, her jacket, her gloves, her goggles, and she would go back there and carve giant pieces of wood with a chainsaw like it was no big thing. When she eventually tried to teach me this, we agreed that I was a danger to myself. I ended up working for Anne throughout the early aughts until I was really hugely pregnant with my first son, Laszlo. I would climb up ladders to work on the fabric elements of her sculptures that she made for the American Embassy in Beijing. And she would laugh at us because the scene was so unconventional. She loved that. When I first started working for her in 2002, I was working part-time and I was also doing production knitting for a fashion designer in the East Village. And I was always exhausted and running around town because I was living up in Harlem. And she offered me full-time work so that I didn't have to hustle so hard and my life became more predictable and stable. She bought me health insurance, which was the most generous thing back then when people just lived without it, hoping they didn't have an accident or get a bladder infection or something. I spent most of my time with her working on the fabric and embroidery elements of her sculptures, draping and pinning and sewing and translating her gestural landscape paintings into computerized embroidery files and then to panels, to machine embroider using this really improvisational method that she used because she was just using a standard size sewing machine. She would purposely come over and fuck up what I was doing because she wanted to maintain the loose gestural quality of the mark making. And she didn't like it when things got too tight. She didn't want things to look too skilled or precious. She wanted it to look like it lived in the same visual world as her other mark making, and it did. We went shopping for fabric together, ate lunch together. I would listen to her as she spoke and sometimes raged on the telephone. And I learned so much about how to stand up for myself in all sorts of different situations from her. In the summer of 2003 and 2004, I commuted every week to her summer house in rural Pennsylvania. She helped pay for my car insurance and she paid for my gas. She gave me a credit card linked to her account. She gave me keys to her Chelsea studio to use for myself when she was away. I can't really underscore enough what a generous person she was to me and how kind she was to me. In Pennsylvania, we would work together throughout the day, and then we would break for some beautiful lunch that she or Philippe would pull together, and then she would try to get me to swim in her tiny, dank pond across from the house. I would go to Pennsylvania at the beginning of the week and stay for 3 or 4 days. I had my own room, and we worked in the attic, or we worked on the giant pieces like the ceramics for the Carnegie International in the barn. Sometimes we worked really late and we would hang out listening to music or the radio. She was politically active and we listened to the news a lot. She also loved listening to Roxy Music and Patti Smith. At some point, she would always bring me a glass of wine. And just like that, the workday was over. It was very civilized. Time to transition into the nighttime. And I always joked with her about how I was their foreign exchange student because they would be speaking French while they brought me around to restaurants and movies and runs to get ice cream. I would crash their dinner parties. I was this weird third wheel. I would be sitting on the couch reading when Anne was up late, walking around the house naked, trying to find the cat. Anyways, it was very intimate. Not only did we work together, but we lived together for some time. And she was my employer. But as my employer, she also seemed dedicated to making sure that I was taken care of. Like that was an ethic that she was responsible to maintain. I can't even express how unique that felt, how unique that still feels. I took a teaching job in Maine in 2004, but continued to work for Anne off and on for years on different projects, including when my personal life was falling apart in 2007, and she went out of her way to give me work, bringing me to New York City from Philadelphia on the train, giving me the keys to her beautiful apartment and letting me stay there. In the summer of 2008, she let me work with my newborn baby in a sling, or we laid him on a pile of blankets on her studio floor. I have a picture of her that I want to show you. It's the last time that I saw her. Can you see that?
Yeah, we can see that, yeah.
So the last time I saw her was in the fall of 2015. She is wearing a very beautiful bracelet in this. She was always so fancy and gorgeous. I brought my 10-year-old son back to New York City for a visit in this picture, and she's showing us her new studio in Brooklyn. It was an upsetting visit because I met with Paul again for the first time after the terrible onslaught of his Alzheimer's. And Anne was so heartbroken, but she drove my son and I around to Bushwick for pizza, and she was gracious and warm. I have one more picture I want to show, and then I am done. Sorry, I'll get back to you guys.
Don't worry, take your time.
Can you see this one?
Not yet. I can only see the original photo of Anne in the studio. Oh, now we can see it.
Okay. Last picture is this stunning, gigantic Chinese Art Deco rug that I stole with Anne's help out of this factory building in Stamford, Connecticut. We were there in 2004 helping to build a huge temporary kiln in the parking lot to smoke fire the 9 hellish spirits. And we had to hang out. And inside there was this incredibly beautiful rug that was all dusty on the floor of a common space. And I started obsessing about how nobody cared for it and how I would and how I needed it in my life. And I told Anne all that, and she thought it was so funny that I wanted to take it. She definitely encouraged lawlessness in all things. It's 8 by 10 feet, and I rolled it up and I folded it in half, and it was almost impossible to carry because it was so heavy, but we got it into her trunk, and it was too big, but she tied her trunk down and she drove it to my apartment in Carroll Gardens. And it's been too big for any space I've ever lived in until now. I live in Portland, Oregon, and I get to have it in my living room, and my kids get to play on it, and it always makes me think of her and her love and support. That's it.
Thank you, Ellen. That's really appreciated. We're going to go back to the full screen, and I'm going to introduce our next speaker. I don't know how we get back to the full screen. The next speaker is going to be Lynn Cook. Alan, I think, oh no, we're good. So, and the next speaker is Lynn Cook, and welcome, Lynn. And if you can introduce yourself, Lynn, and let everybody know where you are. Lynn, can you hear me? Lynn, can you hear me?
Am I unmuted now, Matthew?
Lynn, we can hear you now. Thank you. So welcome, Lynn Cook, and if you can introduce yourself and let us know where you are.
I'm Lynn Cook, and I'm speaking from New York City. I want to begin by thanking Matthew, Janice, and Beatrix Chu for inviting me to participate in this very moving tribute to Anne. And I also want to thank Beatrix for help in checking some of the facts in what I'm about to say. Anyone who knew Anne, even slightly, will know that she dressed with intention, if I can use a phrase we use now. She never appeared to have just put on what was nearest to hand in the wardrobe, whether she was going to the studio or going out for an evening of dinner and drinks. When I saw the moving show at White Columns last week, I was struck by some of the later work, which I'd never seen, and particularly by 2 sculptures from 1916, the last year of her life. One of them is called Pisces Underwater, and the second is Burial of the Sardine. They jogged a vivid memory of a day trip we took to the suburbs outside Washington. In my experience, Anne was quite a private person, but she'd several times mentioned a collection of kippaos, which are traditional Chinese dresses that were in the possession of her Aunt Margaret. We shared, amongst other things, a passion for textiles, and one day she asked me whether I'd like to see this collection. We took a train to DC and then a taxi to her aunt's modest house in the outskirts of the city. After welcoming us, her aunt invited us into her bedroom and told us to make ourselves comfortable. She then went to an adjacent room and came back carrying a cardboard box that was about 30 inches by 18 in my memory. When she took the lid off, I saw a tissue wrap package. And when she unwrapped that, there was an exquisite silk dress which she laid out on the bed for us to admire. She then went out and came back with a second box. Leaving the first dress laid out on the bed, she unpacked the second one and laid it beside the first. Again, it was a remarkably beautiful silk dress with an exquisite traditional pattern. This process went on until, in my memory, a significant pile of gorgeous fabric covered the whole bed. These kippaos from the 1920s and 30s had been owned by Anne's grandmother, who I believe brought them from China with her when she emigrated. They were in perfect condition, suggesting they'd rarely or never been worn. We finally made our farewells and took the train back to New York City. As I recall, we didn't talk a lot about the day on the train. Nor did we talk about it later, though I knew we both held the memory close. At the time, I was struck by Anne's generosity in sharing with me this rare collection that clearly meant so much to her. In retrospect, I value even more her generosity in revealing a part of herself that was so intimate and so charged with feeling. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. I'm now going to introduce and welcome our next speaker, which is Robyn Farrell. And Robyn, welcome. And if you'd like to introduce yourself and just let us know where you are.
Thank you. I'm Robyn Farrell. I am at the Art Institute of Chicago. And I want to thank Matthew and Brittany and Janice and Beatrice for inviting me to be here today and this memorial and celebration to Anne. And it's an honor to be here and talk about her and share these memories with everyone. I have some images to share. So let me attempt to do this. Can you all see that?
Yep, we can see that.
Okay. This is an image from Basel in 2011. And I just thought I wanted to recall this really wonderful evening that Emily and I shared with Anne. I should say that I'm at the Art Institute of Chicago now. I worked at the Donald Young Gallery in the last 3 years of the gallery. And I first met Anne, I think by phone in 2010 when I began working at the gallery. And I think our relationship was primarily by phone for quite some time until I met her in Basel for this installation. And I wanted to start off with this image because, of course, it's such a wonderful memory, but it really shows, I think, what everyone has talked about, Anne's sort of generous and very fun element of her friendship. And also just to recall and show some photos of the installation. And these are not great. I apologize. I recalled them from an old iPhone. But this was her installation for Parcours that year, which she had her own remaking of the William Tell story and had this wonderful, large-scale puppet in addition to these embroidered birds that were in conversation with these murals that were on the wall about sort of the legend of William Tell and his marksmanship with the apple on his son's head. And so there were so many apples, and I wanted to talk about this because I can't think of a better first encounter to be working with Anne and to have a project that for me was really, it sort of transformed the way that I saw space, and to be able to understand Anne's deeply rigorous but imaginative process that was cross-cultural and generational, and how she thought about objects in space. And it's something that has always stuck with me, and of course was one of the earliest and most cherished memories I have of her. And I'm going to scroll through some other images of just some of the work that I was honored to do with Anne. And on one image is this flower drawing that we showed at Donald Young that, I know that there's some in the show, which I can't wait to see in a few weeks when I come to New York, as well as Playing House, which was that incredible exhibition in 2012. And here's the Puto with the flag that was actually just in Ellen's last image. And so I'm sort of love that I'm able to show it how Emily and I put it in our booth for Donald's. Well, this was our last visit to Basel. And it was so incredible to sort of, I remember talking to Anne on the phone from Basel to find out exactly the right way that we were supposed to, install. And then I believe that also, I remember there was a question of, I think one of the wings might have come off or something during the deinstallation. So I think everyone has talked so much about the different aspects of her personality. And I think in working for the gallery in the capacity that I was as an assistant director, I I definitely heard one specific side of Anne, and then as Emily talked about, I really, our relationship became more of a friendship with a new dimension after Donald passed away in 2012. Just to kind of echo what Emily was saying, Anne was consistently checking in, and I discovered sort of her depth of empathy and grasp of friendship and emotion that would really be fruitful for our relationship for the next few years. And even after I, moved on to the museum, she was consistently, checking in and went out of her way to visit me if I was in New York. She and Janice came to see me lecture many times, and up until I think 2015 or 16, we were exchanging holiday greetings, and I wanted to on screen. I have two watercolors that are in the collection that my dear colleague Mark Pascal, an early supporter of her work, acquired for the museum. And I wanted to put them on screen so that I could read this quote from Anne that I thought really speaks to how she was able to not only transform our notions of media and space, but in particular with the marionettes and landscape, how it came from what is a static identity, a marker for many of us in the world, but she abstracted it and made it into a voluminous, layered space for interpretation. And in 2000, for her Matrix exhibition at the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive, she said, "My interest is in the fusion of painting and sculpture, so that the painting and the sculpture is intrinsic to the form making, not decorating it. This is a tradition that has been seen in many ancient cultures, but has not been thoroughly explored in our era yet." And I just really struck me, because what I've taken away from working with her from a professional side, and then also later our friendship, is her strategies for rethinking and re-rendering in time and place are encouraging deeper thought and closer looking, which still resonates with me and the way that I think and work and experience art today. And so I wanted to end with reading that quote and thank everyone again for it's an honor to be here and to remember Anne, and thank everyone for sharing.
Thank you, Robyn. That's really appreciated. And I'm now going to introduce our final speaker. So I'd like to welcome Ingrid Schaffner. Welcome, Ingrid. If you could introduce yourself and let everybody know where you currently are.
Hi, Matthew. Hi, everybody. Ingrid Schaffner here in Marfa, Texas, where I work at the Trinati Foundation. And first, thank you, Beatrix, Janice, Matthew, and behind the screens, Brittany at White Columns, for allowing us all to be with Anne through these affirmations of the love and friendship, affirmations of art that everyone has brought to this gathering. So thank you. I'm going to be a screen sharer.
Yep, we can see that, Ingrid.
Okay. So I first worked with Anne, I think I first met Anne through an exhibition organized at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Philadelphia, the Puppet Show. And here we are. Here I'm with my co-curator, Karen Coney, and Terrence Gower, installing Anne's work. And we saw this work in the Emily's presentation. And the exhibition included this section called Behind the Scenes at the Puppet Show, and where artists contributed sort of significant objects, and there were historic puppets on view. And where the arrows pointed to what Anne contributed to, this little figurine that she had in her collection of amazing things that Anne collected. But then you see these two wooden blocks are carvings that Anne made to teach herself hand carving. And it's a sort of carving tour de force where you carve from a block of wood a cage that holds a ball that can move. And somehow these little objects to me really captured Anne's sort of her intensity and her ferocity and sort of the vitality of her creativity. And here's the installation. You can see the wood carved figures, the marionettes, and there's in the front is the landscape marionette. And then I got to work with Anne. She invited me and Connie Butler also to write for this catalog for her exhibition in Crayfield, Animula, Vagula, Blandula. And I'm going to read some snips from this essay. My essay was called Stuck Marble. And this was as Janice said, 2013. It's summer in Queens, New York. Standing on a table in Anne Chu's studio is Bust, young Roman boy, one of the smaller, more discreet works for her upcoming show in Crayfield, the highlight of which will be an installation of 11 ceramic putti. These are flying about the space, held in place on poles, while Chu continues to build them up along with the rest of her show. Also in the works is a suite of watercolor drawings that feel like frescoes. The paper is that thick, as well as 2 full-length clay sculptures of children, a boy and a girl, destined for marble pedestals. Not here is the figure of a headless man with a crooked cock being cast in nickel silver bronze at the foundry that Chu works with in Switzerland. Another metal job is just back from a fabricator in Belgrade and is spread out on a table in pieces. What started off in the studio as a lacy piece of fabric, roughly hand stitched over wire armatures, has returned galvanized into aluminum, the putti's wings waiting to be attached or rejected. Before delving into the work at hand, a quick snapshot of Chu's studio, located on the 3rd floor of an industrial building that overlooks the entrance to the Midtown Tunnel. The space is graced with a wall of windows that look out to Manhattan. There's a large kiln, work tables, a drawing table, a steel case desk surmounted by a giant computer screen and lots of paperwork, a phalanx of fully loaded bookshelves, a sewing machine, and many arrays of tools and materials, including bins of beautiful fabric. The studio shares a kitchenette with Chu's neighbor, the painter Paul Bloodgood, whose children, Abel and Castle, are the models for 2 of the figures. So the essay focused on this sculpture head or bust and this technique for faking marble known as Stuckmarble, which Anne, when she Googled it, it came up as stuck marble. Plaster and pigment bound together with a glue cooked from animal bone. It's a technique that's typically used in architecture, and Anne specifically associated it with the interiors of provincial churches that she had visited over the years, killing time while working with her metal foundry in St. Gallen. When she decided to incorporate Stuckmarble into her own art, she quickly found that it wasn't going to be easy to adapt a technique used for decorating a wall into making a bust. So we're still in the studio. On the table in the studio, next to the bust, are the first head that she built up from layers of black wax and the plaster mold that she made, from it, from the black wax. Weirdly lined in silicone, the mold looks like a rubber mask was embedded in a dried clod of white mud. Here also are the brushes that Chu used to swab and daub the inside of the mold with pigment before filling it with plaster. I couldn't see inside, so I had no idea how the color was going on, let alone how it would get pulled off onto the surface when it dried. And there in the pan, and there's also the pan of bone glue that got abandoned in the process. Just too disgusting, said Anne. Surveying all of this stuff and mess, one wonders why Chu didn't just carve a head out of a chunk of plaster and paint it. The answer, of course, is geo-illogical. What rock blooms terracotta red through bursts of yellow sandstone that have been clouded over by cold gray stone? This painterly aggregate looks no more like a piece of marble than it did the walls of those Swiss village churches, but that's the point. More artificial than natural, Chu's work represents representation over time, time contained and objectified on every level of her art's imagery, making, and reception. This bust, young Roman boy, viscerally references classical Western art while physically representing some vernacular decorative tradition that, even if you don't know exactly where to place it, clearly took time and effort to execute. The pressure of holding all these modes of time together finds its expression in the face of the boy, who purses his mouth shut, opens his eyes wide, bulges out his cheeks, and obstinately endures the alarming process of turning into stone. Chu's art appears to welcome damage. She routinely pushes her equipment, materials, craft, and ever newfound techniques beyond the limits of their intended purpose to the point of snapping, breaking, ripping, exploding. Her studio is as much a place of destruction as it is creation, where brute repairs and tender conservation are just part of the process. Perhaps I shouldn't be surprised then at the roughness with which Chu handles her work. She demonstrates how the porcelain putti fit together like dolls or marionettes by twisting the head off of one and jamming it back into the empty socket. The ceramic grates as she attempts to get the head to catch hold of the invisible metal armature that's inside of each putto. Frustrated, she leaves the head on the floor. Later, it occurs that such an impasse, like all the deliberations and struggles that Chu packs into her art, is just another way of accruing time. We speak of the weight of time, but now that her work has been installed in Crayfield, whatever forces moored it to the studio have been untethered, and Chu's sculptures are positively buoyant. The putti defied gravity as if the galleries were underwater or high in the air, to zones that the artist has explored aloft and in depth. A certified scuba diver for more than a decade, Chu hired a pilot last winter during an artist residency in the Big Sky country of Wyoming to fly her up to photograph the clouds. She considered it lucky that the weather was so bad. The pilot offered to postpone the trip because she considers it lucky because the thunderheads were that magnificent. So Janice spoke about Anne, the traveler, and we knew Anne, she was the world traveler, and thinking about travel as another funnel of time. Travel plays an important role in the collecting of information and experience that Anne's work gives form and shape to. In an ever ongoing process of research, she travels frequently, ambitiously, out of the blue and all over the world. The cast male figure is based on a sculpture that she photographed in the Hermitage last winter, when a cheap chance to go to Russia materialized. Likewise, she was recently on a boat deep in the Amazon. Over the years, Chu has traveled the globe, especially in Asia, except for Africa, which awaits. So she had traveled to Pompeii as part of the research for the Crayfield work. And she recalled seeing in one of the fresco paintings in a decorative detail, a painting of a putti as if it had fallen from the sky and landed on the ground. Listen to the smack of small flesh as it echoes beautifully and uncomfortably throughout these pristine white gallery chambers. Chu created this installation specifically for House Along, one of two adjoining houses designed by Mies van der Rohe that are now part of the Kunstmuseum Crayfield. A classic work of modern architecture, the last thing these rooms would like to admit is wall decoration, no matter how classical the reference is, especially as it involved babies flashing about. The exhibition draws its title from another artist who worked in and out of time, the writer Marguerite Yourcenar, whose great novel, Memoirs of Hadrian from 1951, applies the full force of a formidable classicist and modern intellect to project readers into antiquity. Animula, vagula, blandula is the first line of a poem by the Roman Emperor Hadrian. Little soul, gentle and drifting, guest and companion of my body, now you will dwell below in pallid places, stark and bare. There you will abandon your play of yore. Readers of the novel will associate the little soul with Hadrian's lover, the Greek boy, Antinous, who committed suicide rather than grow old and out of favor, and with the emperor himself, once a boy whose portrait was no doubt carved as a marble bust. For viewers of this exhibition, it's the sculptural putti and children that will absorb the poem's associations. Amiable, roving, unbending, and bare, they fill this empty house, voided of its former distractions, with forces, fragments, and figures of time. In so doing, Anne Chu's sculptures perform a useful function. Because her art packs such a random and precise range of references, it doesn't permit us to entertain the notion that the past is settled, the present is known, and it's time to move on. Because her art is so aggressively decorative and physical at once, its presence arrests attention and disrupts time. Because it comes to us as if thrown over the transom or pushed through the wall of time, Chu's work imagines a future in which our capacity for being in the present has been radically expanded by all there is to absorb. So thank you, Anne, for your global appetites and your voracious vision, for leaving us in a world where your art gives us so much to think about and see. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid. In closing, I would just like to thank all of tonight's speakers, Janice, Connie, Emily, Suzanne, Bruce, Aki, Ellen, Lynn, Robyn, and Ingrid for sharing your memories of Anne in this wonderful collective tribute. Anne's exhibition will continue at White Columns through December 18. Somebody asked me to remind them of the closing dates across the Thanksgiving holiday. The gallery will be closed from the 25th to the 27th, and we'll reopen on November 30th at 11 a.m., and then we'll resume normal hours. Again, I'd like to, on behalf of White Columns, thank Janice Guy, Beatrix Chu, and the estate of Anne Chu for the wonderful conversations and collaboration that led to the exhibition. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the exhibition focuses on works made towards the end of Anne's life. And obviously during this evening's presentation, we've seen some extraordinary works made across the span of Anne's career. And really our hope is the exhibition reanimates Anne's work and also leads to subsequent future and larger conversations around her practice. So I'd like to thank everybody who joined this broadcast, wherever you are, whatever time of the day it is, wherever you are. And once again, I'd like to thank all of our contributors and participants. We really appreciate the time you took, and we really appreciate hearing your thoughts. So enjoy the weekend, everybody. And if you haven't had a chance to see the exhibition in New York, please stop by White Columns. So thanks once again, everyone.
Thank you, Matthew.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, Janice.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Bye.